The first time she asked me why I didn't fight for her, the sunlight pouring through my kitchen window made everything feel cruelly ordinary. The coffee machine hissed softly in the corner, the neighbor's dog barked somewhere outside, and the smell of toasted bread still lingered in the air while my entire world quietly came apart in front of me. She stood there leaning against my kitchen counter in a pale yellow sweater, fingers wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold, looking at me with tired eyes that no longer knew how to hope. Then she whispered the words that would haunt me for years, "Why don't you fight for me?" And the worst part was that I had no answer. I just stood there frozen like a man watching his own house burn down without reaching for water. If you believe people deserve kindness, healing, and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Lifeline Vibes. Stories like this remind us how fragile love can be and how powerful redemption truly is. My name is Corbin Vale, and for most of my life I believed silence was safer than honesty. I grew up in a house where emotions were treated like weaknesses that needed to be buried before they embarrassed anyone. My father worked construction 6 days a week and measured love through bills paid and roofs repaired. My mother stopped expecting affection from him before I was old enough to understand marriage. Nobody yelled much in our house. Nobody hugged much either. We simply existed together like co-workers assigned to the same building. So when I became an adult, I carried that same emotional distance into every relationship without realizing it. I thought showing up was enough. I thought loyalty mattered more than vulnerability. I thought love could survive without words if your intentions were good. I was wrong. I met Marin Whitlock on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in late spring. The city library downtown had a small cafe attached to it, and I used to sit there during lunch breaks pretending to read while avoiding conversations with coworkers. She worked remotely as a children's book illustrator and spent most afternoons sketching by the windows. The first thing I noticed about her wasn't her beauty, though she was beautiful in a soft and effortless way. It was the way she paid attention to people. She looked at strangers like their stories mattered. Elderly women, exhausted parents, nervous teenagers, delivery drivers rushing in for coffee, she saw everyone. One afternoon a little boy dropped his crayons across the floor and started crying, and Marin got down on her knees helping him pick them up while making up ridiculous stories about each color. The child laughed so hard milk came out of his nose. Everyone in the cafe smiled. I remember thinking she carried light around inside her. We started talking after she caught me staring at one of her sketches. Instead of getting uncomfortable, she laughed and asked if I thought the rabbit she was drawing looked too judgmental. I surprised myself by laughing back. That tiny moment somehow became hours of conversation spread over weeks. She told me she grew up near the coast with 3 sisters and dreamed of illustrating books full-time. I told her I repaired commercial refrigerators and secretly hated how lonely my apartment felt every night. She never made me feel foolish for opening up, even in small pieces. Around her, I felt calmer than I had in years. Our relationship unfolded during bright daytime moments that felt cinematic in ways I never appreciated enough while living them. Saturday farmers markets under warm skies. Roadside diners with sticky tables and terrible coffee. Long walks through crowded downtown streets while she pointed out murals and hidden flower shops I had passed 100 times without noticing. Marin made life feel vivid. She would stop in the middle of sidewalks just to admire sunlight reflecting off windows. She danced while cooking pasta. She sang terribly in the car with absolute confidence. And slowly, she turned my apartment into something that resembled a home. But loving someone and knowing how to keep them are not the same thing. At first, the problems were small enough to ignore. She would ask me what I was thinking, and I would shrug instead of answering honestly. She would tell me about her fears regarding work, and I would offer practical solutions instead of comfort. Whenever conflict appeared, I retreated into silence because silence was all I had ever learned. Marin fought differently. She wanted conversations, reassurance, vulnerability. She wanted to feel chosen every day. I loved her deeply, but I expressed love like a locked door. I fixed things around the apartment, remembered her coffee order, filled her gas tank, carried heavy grocery bags, but I rarely said what lived inside my chest. Over time, she began looking lonelier beside me than she ever had alone. The hardest year of our relationship began after her mother became sick. It started with headaches, then dizziness, then a diagnosis none of us were prepared for. Marin spent weeks driving between hospitals, handling insurance paperwork, comforting her younger sisters, and pretending she was stronger than she felt. She cried in the shower so nobody would hear her. She stopped drawing for months. I wanted to help, but every time pain entered the room, I became emotionally paralyzed. Instead of holding her tightly, I asked practical questions. Instead of telling her she could fall apart safely with me, I told her everything would probably be okay. She didn't need logic. She needed love spoken out loud. One afternoon she came home exhausted after another hospital visit. The sun was blazing outside, washing the kitchen in gold light while dust floated through the air like tiny sparks. She leaned against the counter looking completely drained, and I kept pretending to focus on repairing a cabinet hinge because I didn't know how to comfort her sadness. That was when she asked it. Quietly. Almost gently. "Why don't you fight for me?" I looked up confused. She wasn't angry. That made it worse. Tears filled her eyes as she explained that every difficult moment in our relationship felt one-sided. She said she kept reaching for me emotionally while I stayed hidden behind silence. She said she was tired of begging to feel loved loudly instead of quietly assumed. She wanted me to fight for us instead of acting like losing her would simply be unfortunate but survivable. I remember my chest tightening because I did want to fight for her. I just didn't know how. Nobody had ever taught me. And instead of admitting that terrifying truth, I stayed silent again. 3 weeks later, she moved out during broad daylight while I was at work. She left carefully folded towels in the bathroom, cleaned the kitchen, watered the plants, and placed her apartment key beside a handwritten note on the counter. The note wasn't cruel. That somehow hurt even more. She wrote that she loved me enough to leave before resentment destroyed every good memory we had built together. She said maybe someday I would learn that loving someone quietly is not always enough. Then she apologized for giving up. I sat on the kitchen floor for almost an hour holding that letter while sunlight slowly shifted across the tiles. The apartment felt enormous without her laughter inside it. For the first time in my life, silence did not feel safe. It felt unbearable. The months that followed were ugly in quiet ways nobody posts online. I stopped sleeping properly. I lost weight without trying. I avoided places we used to visit because seeing couples laughing together physically hurt. Every morning I woke up reaching toward the empty side of the bed before remembering she was gone. The loneliness was not dramatic. It was slow and suffocating. Grocery shopping alone. Eating dinner in silence. Coming home to rooms that no longer smelled like her shampoo or fresh paint or cinnamon candles. I realized too late how deeply she had woven herself into the ordinary structure of my life. One afternoon, nearly 5 months after she left, I found one of her old sketches tucked inside a drawer while searching for spare batteries. It was a drawing of our kitchen. Sunlight through the window. Coffee mugs on the counter. Me standing awkwardly beside the sink while pretending not to smile. Underneath the sketch she had written in tiny letters, "He loves quietly, but I wish he knew quiet things can still break." That sentence destroyed me. For the first time in my life, I stopped blaming circumstances and started examining myself honestly. I began therapy after spending nearly an hour sitting outside the office debating whether to walk in. I hated every second at first. Talking about emotions felt unnatural, embarrassing, almost physically painful. But week after week, buried things surfaced. My childhood. My fear of vulnerability. My habit of retreating whenever emotional intensity appeared. The therapist told me something that stayed with me for years. She said people who grow up emotionally neglected often mistake emotional distance for stability. That sentence explained my entire life. Slowly, painfully, I started changing. Not for the purpose of winning Marin back, but because I finally understood the damage my silence caused. I learned how to communicate instead of shutting down. I learned that comfort sometimes means sitting beside someone's pain instead of fixing it. I learned that love unspoken too long can begin to feel invisible. The process was humiliating and beautiful at the same time. Nearly a year after Marin left, I saw her again unexpectedly at an outdoor art fair downtown. The day was bright and warm, children running between booths while musicians played somewhere nearby. She stood beneath a white canopy displaying illustrated prints and handmade bookmarks. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. She looked different somehow. Stronger. Sadder too. Her hair was shorter, and there were tiny lines near her eyes that hadn't existed before. But when she noticed me standing there frozen among strangers, I saw the same softness flicker across her face. We talked awkwardly at first. Surface-level things. Work. Her mother's improving health. My therapy sessions, which surprised her into silence for several seconds. Then she smiled in a way that looked painfully hopeful. Not because she expected anything, but because she finally saw evidence that I had heard her. Really heard her. After that afternoon, we started meeting occasionally for coffee. No labels. No promises. Just two people carefully navigating the ruins of something that once mattered deeply. This time I forced myself to stay emotionally present even when it terrified me. When she talked about difficult things, I listened instead of retreating. When I felt afraid, I admitted it instead of hiding behind silence. Some conversations left me shaking afterward because vulnerability felt like stepping outside without armor. But for the first time, I understood why it mattered. One particularly hot afternoon near the end of summer, we ended up back in my apartment after walking through a crowded street market. The sunlight looked almost identical to the day she left. The same golden warmth filled the kitchen. The same coffee mug sat on the counter. For a brief second I saw the memory of us layered over the present so vividly it hurt. Marin leaned against the counter again, almost unconsciously mirroring that devastating moment from the past. But this time something was different. Neither of us hid from the silence. She looked at me carefully, and I realized she wasn't asking whether I loved her anymore. She already knew I did. The real question was whether I could finally show it before fear swallowed everything again. So I walked toward her instead of freezing. I told her I had loved her every single day she was gone. I told her losing her forced me to confront parts of myself I had spent years avoiding. I admitted I was still learning, still imperfect, still scared sometimes, but I no longer wanted to survive relationships emotionally absent. My voice shook while speaking because honesty still felt unfamiliar, but I kept going anyway. Then I said the words I should have spoken years earlier. I told her she was worth fighting for even when I didn't know how. She cried quietly while covering her mouth with one hand. And when she stepped into my arms, it felt less like a dramatic movie ending and more like two exhausted people finally setting down the weight they had been carrying separately for too long. Healing did not happen instantly after that. Real life is not built from magical transformations. We still argued sometimes. I still struggled with emotional habits formed over decades. Trust rebuilt slowly through consistency rather than promises. But now, when conflict appeared, I stayed present instead of disappearing behind silence. And Marin, to her credit, allowed space for growth without demanding perfection. A year later we moved into a small yellow house with large daytime windows because she said sunlight made every room feel alive. She turned the spare bedroom into an art studio filled with paints, unfinished sketches, and little notes taped everywhere. I planted tomatoes in the backyard despite knowing almost nothing about gardening. Some mornings we drank coffee quietly at the kitchen counter while sunlight poured across the floor, and I would think about how close I came to losing this life permanently because I mistook emotional distance for strength. The strange thing about love is that people often imagine losing it happens through betrayal or explosive fights. But sometimes love disappears slowly through absence. Through words unsaid. Through comfort never offered. Through fear disguised as calmness. And by the time someone asks why you won't fight for them, they have usually been hurting alone for a very long time. So if you are watching this right now and there is someone in your life quietly begging to feel chosen, don't wait until silence destroys what love built. Speak. Hold them. Show up emotionally before regret teaches you lessons kindness tried teaching first. And if this story touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes. Your support helps stories like these reach people who may desperately need them today.